All right, welcome in everyone to our Great Lakes ROTA-RC presentation this afternoon from our Youth Mental Health and Social Success series. Today's presentation is part one of Digital Consent Rights for Youth with Disabilities. Our hosts for today's session is UW-Madison Division of Extension, so I just want to take a minute to thank them for providing today's session and for hosting our presenter. I will be your series host. I'm Great Lakes ROTA-RC Regional Project Manager, Amanda Curra. Just got a few housekeeping items that I need to go through before we get stuck into our session. Just to acknowledge our funder and to acknowledge that we are a SAMHSA funded training grant project. We are an HHS Region 5 project, and that covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. If you've been with us before, it's nothing new to you. That is our website up on the slide there. We'll be providing it to you again later if you're new to us, so don't worry. We'll make sure that you get that information. As part of our grant, we do virtual and on-demand education, provide evidence-based resources and research, as well as technical outreach to professionals working in and with rural communities. So that is the remit of our grant project and why you are here today. That's part of why you're here today. So welcome on in. Whether you're part of Region 5 or not, we welcome everybody and we're glad that you're here. I just want to take a minute to show you one of our products, and that's our website. So I just want to have a quick look at one of our the resource library on our webpage to acknowledge just some of the many resources that we provide, many of which come from our partners, the TTCs, SAMHSA, the ORNs. We're featuring some of those products and some of those partners right now through our Know Your Resources series. So please check back and some of the webinars that we're doing, but also check out our resource library. There's lots of toolkits, videos, podcasts, supportive apps, lots of things to find in there. And we hope you check out our website. Moving on now, let's set the scene for today's session. I want to just remind everybody that as we prepare to listen and engage in the session today, I just want to take a moment to promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. As we create that environment of learning together, we want to feel welcoming and safe for everyone. So let's work together to manage a space that supports non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can help reduce that negative bias and promote engagement. And as always, we invite you to learn about successful prevention and recovery from whatever space you are joining us from today. So we welcome you formally into the Great Lakes ROTA-RC community of learning. I want to welcome in today Ellen. So Ellen Merker is our presenter. I'm going to hand it over to her as part of our technical snafu here. We're working on some slides that we don't have all the content there, so I do apologize. But I'm gonna allow Ellen to give us a little background on where she is and where she comes from. Before we do that, we have a little poll that I want to make sure that you get an opportunity to engage in, just to kind of get a sense of where your knowledge is. As part of our series, we want to just get to know more about how everybody is learning about neurodiverse youth, their mental health. And so we'll do another little poll at the end. We appreciate your time answering that question. It's quick, it's easy. This kind of helps us all understand where we're at. Once everybody's engaged with that, which I think got everybody, and we'll go ahead and close the poll, and I will hand it over to Ellen. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so I'm already realizing that switching this from Canva into Microsoft PowerPoint might, Yeah, it's making some of it's not showing up the right way. Amanda, could you take a second while I'm just kind of introducing myself and just pull up the PowerPoints and you can do it because I think it's just going to look a lot nicer and neater. Thank you. Um, okay, so yeah, thank you for that introduction. A little bit more about me before we get started. I founded my agency, Heart Consulting, back in 2017. After I went to UW-Madison, both undergrad and grad school for rehabilitation psychology. And when I got out of college, my first job was as a support broker, which, if you're not familiar with that, that was case management. There's not a whole lot of them now. But working with people with developmental disabilities to identify resources and make sure they're getting services and support that they need. Okay, Amanda, I'll stop sharing, Amanda, and you can take over. And so in that process, or in that role, I had an adult young woman who had Down syndrome who got into trouble at work because she asked a coworker about sex. And by no means was she like trying to make this person uncomfortable or anything. She just had questions and didn't know who the right person was to go to. And so I tried to find her some resources, right? Like that was my job. And I could not find anything out there to help people with developmental disabilities learn more about healthy relationships and sexuality. So I happened to have a friend working at the Rape Crisis Center at the time, and I had done my master's thesis on this topic as well. So we created a group for young women with developmental disabilities to learn more about healthy, safe relationships, and just did that on the side of my case management job, and it really took off. People really got a lot out of it. I kept getting asked to do more, do one for a men's group. And so eventually I was like, you know what, clearly there is a really big need for this. I can do more around this. So I quit my job and started Heart Consulting. And so my mission with Heart Consulting is to reduce sexual and domestic violence against people with developmental disabilities. I do that through some education. So I run groups for teens, kids, and adults with developmental disabilities to learn about things like consent and assertiveness and healthy sexuality, online safety, those kinds of things. I do a lot of caregiver consultation. So helping parents and caregivers learn, if my teenager is sexting or looking at porn or engaging in some really risky relationship or sexual behaviors, how do I approach that in a way that's actually going to be effective? And I also am a therapist. I specifically work with neurodivergent clients, mostly around trauma, but also depression and anxiety as well. So as well, because I think it's important that we have professionals and caregivers really understanding these specific clients around these difficult and sometimes uncomfortable topics. So Amanda, you can scroll down. So we're going to talk today about a few different things. And a lot of what I like to start talking about is really reflecting on our own values. What has relationships been like for us? What has our experiences with online dating been for us? A lot of times, what I find is caregivers and professionals are really bringing their own experiences into how they're working with people with developmental disabilities, and not always understanding that neurodivergent teens and young adults may have very different experiences, very different goals, and very different ways to connect. So we're going to be talking about kind of how do we reflect on that, but also how do we create more safe opportunities for connection that are meaningful to neurodivergent youth. You can scroll down. So I just want to make a note about language. So I often use the term neurodivergence. And, I saw in that poll that not everybody is really familiar with whether it's neurodivergence or this topic of neurodivergence and online safety. But neurodivergence is an umbrella term for any neurology that differs from the majority. So that might include autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, trauma, CP, and epilepsy, and more. And what it really focuses on is moving away from this medical model, particularly with autism and ADHD, saying, well, there's something wrong with this and we need to fix it, right? The medical model always wants to get in and fix everything about the person and sort of cure and treat things. When in fact, sometimes if we look at the environment is potentially what's causing barriers. So being neurodivergent and living in a world that is meant for and built for neurotypical people is really, really hard. And so it's really looking more at not how do we make this person mask and fit in, and you got to, make small talk and be polite and do all these things, make eye contact. But instead of looking at that, how do we accommodate? How can we adapt environments to make them more neurodivergent, affirmative, and friendly? Another note, so I know that, Amanda had talked about person first language. That is exactly what I learned when I was in grad school too, as you say, a person with a disability. Largely, the autistic community has come out and said we actually prefer identity first language. So there are a lot of people who don't want to be called a person with autism, but rather an autistic person or an neurodivergent person. So because of that, because I've heard a lot of this from lots and lots and lots of autistic influencers and writers. That's the language I use. However, whenever I'm working with somebody, I would always ask, how do you prefer to be identified? What's your preference? So that's just not me. Something that I've learned as I've gotten more into the field and with people. That person first language is not what necessarily every single person wants. At least when it comes to autism, that's kind of the main group that I've been hearing that from a lot. All right, Amanda, you can go to the next one. Okay, so I know that this is a mental health series, and ROTA is, somewhat focused on drug and alcohol treatment. So why are we talking about sex and dating and online safety? We as humans are social creatures. Our mental health is very intricately tied to our connections with other humans. And a lot of times for neurodivergent people, there's this assumption that they are quote unquote antisocial or not interested in friendships, not interested in getting together, when in fact, that's usually not true. Certainly that's true for some people. Some people are very introverted and love their alone time. But for a lot of people, it's, more the fact that it's just harder to connect, or they connect in different ways than neurotypical people. So, if you just think about your experience with COVID. Does anybody want to share? Like, what was it like to we were pretty isolated for a long time. What kinds of impacts do we see on our mental health when that happens? And if you want to, you can type it in the chat or shout it out, whatever works.
It was depressing.
Yeah, depressing. We saw a lot of depression, a lot of increase in mental health referrals during COVID. Depression, withdrawal, absolutely. And so I think it's important to keep in mind, we need to feel connected. What COVID was like for a lot of us was actually what life for a lot of people with developmental disabilities was like pre-COVID, right? Like a lot of my clients have always dealt with that isolation because of the nature of our systems. We don't put a whole lot of, our systems don't put a whole lot of effort into connecting people. It's really focused on, are they physically safe? Are they medically healthy? Do they have at least a couple of hours of work a week? Sometimes some teams prioritize that and sometimes they don't. But there isn't a focus on funding services that would help people have some social time, some leisure time. So you go to work and you go home and that's it. And then we see people trying to ask out their coworkers or go online to meet people because these are the only opportunities that they have. And so that's why we're talking about this online safety piece and connection, because it is so much tied to our mental health. Loneliness is, definitely a risk factor for anxiety, for depression, for withdrawal, for increased physical health problems as well. High blood pressure, cardiac issues, increase in hospitalizations and recurring hospitalizations and readmissions all happen more when we see people who are dealing with chronic loneliness and isolation. You can go to the next slide, Amanda. So I kind of got ahead of myself, but the impacts of loneliness. We also see decreased self-esteem. And so, when you grow up feeling like nobody wants to be friends with you and nobody wants to hang out with you, it really impacts your mental health, even well into adulthood. So this not only impacts mental health, but it also can lead to unhealthy relationship behaviors. If you have spent your entire childhood being bullied and excluded, and then finally somebody comes along who says, I love you, I care about you, you're the best thing ever, you might really attach to that and cling to that because it feels so good to finally have somebody see you and hear you and care for you. But then you might miss some pretty big red flags in that relationship. And we're going to talk more about that as well. But it can lead to some pretty risky dating and relationship behavior because people are just so eager to get that connection that they need that they'll look for, that they're not paying attention to some safety concerns. Amanda, you can scroll to the next slide. So speaking of these, unhealthy relationships, there's a lot of risk factors for this that a lot of neurodivergent teens and adults are facing. There's the social aspect. So we have trained compliance. From a very young age, we have parents, caregivers, and schools that are training kids to basically just do as they're told, right? We have all these behavioral programs. We have ABA therapy. We have, lots of different rewards and consequences growing up, and to teach, obey authority. However, what we're not doing is teaching kids when is the right time to be cooperative and when is the right time to be assertive. There is not a whole lot of training in assertiveness skills for kids with developmental disabilities and neurodivergent kids. And this is a real problem because it really can lead to some unhealthy relationships because you just haven't learned what to expect in a good, healthy relationship. There's also, like I was talking about the isolation, lack of opportunities for safely meeting other people. Bullying and exclusion leads to a lot of decreased self-esteem, and again, leading to, this is just what I'm used to, right? Like it becomes the norm. Being told what to do, being controlled, having your feelings hurt becomes the norm, and then it's not unusual when you get into a relationship with somebody who treats you that way. And what we really want is for growing up, recognizing that that's weird. Like that's not normal behavior, so that they can help or better be able to identify those red flags. There's also a huge lack of education around sex in particular, but also relationships. So what we see is students who are neurodivergent or have developmental disabilities are, it depends. Some schools have comprehensive sex education. Some schools don't. Even in the state of Wisconsin, there's no, statewide mandate on this. And so it depends on which district you're in. You might not get anything. You might get abstinence only, or you might get evidence-based comprehensive. Even if it is evidence-based comprehensive sex education, often students with disabilities who need to have like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, doctor's appointments, they're most likely to be taken out of class during that health class. In addition, sometimes those sex ed classes are not at the right level or moved a little too fast for students with intellectual disabilities in particular. So I've had clients with intellectual disabilities who will say, I really want to have sex with my boyfriend or girlfriend. And when I ask, what does that mean to you? They will describe snuggling or maybe some kissing. They don't actually know what happens during sex, and that's a problem. Like, this is really setting them up to be exploited. And so sometimes in a sex ed class, teacher might be talking about sex, assuming that everybody in the class just knows what that means. Because I remember having sex ed back in high school, and she definitely did not describe sex to us. She just used the word sex and assumed that we all knew that what that meant. It's also usually not inclusive, meaning it may not be addressing LGBTQ differences and that are, like different types of protection and or different sensory needs that are really come up a lot in sexual relationships. And with that, taking, out of these sex ed classes or parents signing them out, what this really is what we call infantilization. So treating people with disabilities, whether that's neurodivergent or developmental disabilities or physical disabilities, treating them as children. And this is a real problem because, one, they're not children, they're teenagers, they're adults. And so we need to really be talking to people on their level, certainly, but also not in a condescending way. I know when I started that group with the Rape Crisis Center, somebody had contacted us afterwards, a residential staff who had one of their clients coming to join our group, and she attended every single group. And when it was done, they were really surprised. She had never wanted to participate in groups. She always refused or didn't follow through on more than one. And so they asked her after this was done, well, what was it about this group that you kept wanting to go back and you didn't resist it? And she said, well, because they talked to me like an adult. She was so not used to being talked to like an adult, and we were just kind of really honest and clear and used the right language for anatomy and things like that, and that kept her coming back, which is really, really important. I also have gotten some referrals or started working with teenagers or adults, and somebody, whether it's a parent or a teacher or somebody, will say they're starting to show an interest in sexuality and relationships, but they read at a fifth grade level, so we really don't think that they're cognitively able to have sex. Reading level and IQ do not determine your ability to consent to sex, and certainly do not control your hormones. It doesn't matter what you can read. You have the same hormones at that age as any other teenager, so you're going to have the same interests as them. So it's really important not to make these assumptions about neurodivergent kids and teenagers that they're not interested in sex or shouldn't be having sex, because that stops us from having really important conversations that could really protect them and keep them safe. Another risk factor for unhealthy relationships is not being believed. A lot of neurodivergent people, when they do try to report, a partner or it's a staff or a family member who has been abusive in some way, they're frequently not believed or told oh, you're just confused, or you're just being overdramatic, or you're just attention seeking. I hear attention seeking a lot. I am not a fan of that word. I prefer to try to reframe it as support seeking. But I would never accuse somebody of attention seeking after reporting some unhealthy behavior or unsafe behavior. But it absolutely happens. Some other risk factors, the environmental aspect. If you don't have a lot of support, you don't have many people to go to help you, especially if something traumatic does happen. Decreased self-esteem due to the exclusion and bullying, and the long-term support system isn't always providing the support level it needs or people need. And oftentimes it is residential staff, paid staff, who are the ones who are being abusive. And this comes back to, there's a lot of isolation, right? Somebody's living in an AFH out in the country. They have literally one person who ever sees them, and that person is abusive. Who are they supposed to report it to? And so we see, unfortunately, a lot of sexual assault and abuse of people with developmental disabilities. And then there's the physical aspect too, is the ability to communicate and report when something unsafe is happening, and the ability to physically leave an abusive situation. So I just like to make note that, a lot of people will assume that neurodivergent people or somebody with an intellectual disability are at higher risk because of their cognitive level or their naivety, that they just kind of fall for other people easily. When really, if you look at these risk factors, there are so many risk factors that are external to the person and have nothing to do with the individual themselves. It's our systems, it's our societies, it's our cultures that are really setting neurodivergent youth up for some pretty traumatic experiences. So if you could scroll down, Amanda. Okay, so we're going to kind of get into a little bit more about online safety, and I want to do an activity, trying to see what we can do in the chat with this. It might be here, or maybe we could do a poll. Nah, poll won't really work. So basically, my question, I'm going to ask some questions, and if you are totally comfortable with it, you do nothing. If you are a little uncomfortable with it, but you think you can handle it, it would be hard, but you could do it. Normally I would say raise your hand, but I can't see everybody. And so maybe send an emoji. What kind of emojis do we have in here? Send an emoji of like maybe a nervous, maybe you can find one that kind of matches how you would feel. And then, and just one emoji. If you're like, oh my gosh, I totally can't handle that, don't want to deal with it, don't know how to deal with that, you would panic. I would say to like wave your arms around, but for this, let's just send a whole bunch of like emojis. Okay, that might be the easiest way to do it virtually. All right, so first question, what if I told you there was a mouse in the room with you right now? Is everybody okay with the mouse in the room? Okay, I don't see any emojis, so oh, there's one. Okay, so there's a couple. So yeah, some people would be uncomfortable with that. What if I told you that mouse was on your shoulder? The mouse is on your shoulder now. Any reactions? That's a hard no. Okay, so seeing a lot of like disgusted faces, but not like, oh, okay, this Zoom is not letting me scroll through these messages very easily. So more uncomfortable the closer it gets to you. Not surprising. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of like a whole bunch of emojis all in one. Okay, Catherine sent like a whole bunch of emojis. So Catherine's just like, whoa, no, absolutely not. So what if, I don't know all of your roles, but let's say you're, working with a student in whatever your role is who is neurodivergent or has an intellectual disability. And what if they ask you, where do babies come from? How are babies made? How do people feel about having that conversation with somebody with an intellectual disability? Okay, so Amanda says thumbs up. She's good with it. What if that same student, we'll call them, that same neurodivergent student, you caught them looking at porn on their computer? Okay, so a little bit more reactions with the porn, it seems like. What if you had a neurodivergent student who asked you to help them buy condoms? Okay, so some discomfort with the condoms, it seems like. So, and I want to just like normalize and validate these conversations are hard to have with anybody. And the issue is the more uncomfortable that we are, the more uncomfortable they're going to be. And it's going, if we're uncomfortable with any conversations about sexuality or online dating or porn, things like this, they're going to pick up on the discomfort, and they may not ask questions or say when something, scary or traumatic has happened to them. And so, I mean, if you want to go to the next slide. So I want to just talk about what is it that makes these conversations hard? Why is it uncomfortable and hard to talk about porn or sexting or online dating or sex in general? So I just want to take a second to think about, how did you all first learn about dating or sex? I can start because I talk about these things all the time. I'm super comfortable with it. My parents never talked to me about sex. I wouldn't say it was like a super conservative household, but it was not something that our family discussed. I did get sex education in high school and I think middle school too. But a lot of what I learned really was from other students, right? Other people my age, and they don't always know accurate information. Not always the best people to get information from. Social media was not a thing when I was growing up. So, but today I'm sure people are learning about sex and sexting and porn and relationships a lot from social media as well. But if I had grown up in an extremely conservative household that was very religious, that had a lot of views about sex, that might influence my own views of sex and how I communicate with other people in this job. I don't know if I could do this job now if I had that sort of bringing up. Does anybody else want to share anything about like how maybe your experiences, your values might shape your views of sexuality? And feel free to type it or speak up. Or what are some other places that people tend to learn about these topics from?
School, work, community members. I mean,
yeah, work is an interesting one too. So, church, absolutely. And that can be, positive or not. I know the Unitarian Church has like a sex ed program themselves. But church, lots of stigma, abstinence. Planned Parenthood did a presentation at somebody's school, which is great. And I lost my train of thought that I was gonna mention something else just a second ago, and I got distracted. But all these experiences as we're growing up really influence how we view dating and relationships and sex, and or if you, for people who have experienced trauma, of course, talking about anything around sex would be very difficult. And so the reason I bring these topics up and encourage people to reflect on their values and what has impacted them is, if I am bringing an extremely religious, conservative viewpoint into my work and somebody has a question about sex, that might make me shut that down and say, no, we don't talk about that. And so if it, really violates your religious or cultural beliefs to have these conversations, I am not saying everybody has to be the person to have those conversations about sexting, porn, dating, things like that. But it would be important to find somebody who is the right person, who does feel comfortable with those conversations. Or if you just don't feel like you're educated and knowledgeable enough on the topic, making sure that we are not judging or shaming anybody because they have questions. That really leads to people shutting down and not asking questions and not coming forth when there's something that's concerning or unsafe happening. So we really want to build relationships with people, build trusting, non-judgmental relationships, so that when these things do come up, if they get caught sexting, or looking at porn or things like that, they're not afraid to come to somebody for help and for advice and guidance. And Amanda, you can scroll to the next slide. So let's also just talk about, how do you connect with others? There's all different kinds of ways to connect. So maybe if people want to throw in some ways in the chat that you enjoy connecting with, whether it's friends or family. And Stacy, I just saw your message. That's awesome. Okay, so Stacy said connecting through social media. Yeah. How else do people connect with friends? Instagram. Call, talking to someone on the phone. Shared activities and interests. Yep, getting together and doing something that you both like. Exchange memes. School work, social outings. Going to the grocery store. Yeah, so these are all great ways to connect. And we connect for lots of reasons, it feels good, it improves our mental health, it gets us out of the house, super important. Amanda, can you go to the next screen? So how might your experiences of connecting with others be different from somebody who's neurodivergent? I don't have to ask for permission. Yes. You might not have, a lot of neurotypical people do not have to ask somebody, hey, help me plan this get together and figure out transportation. And, a lot of people with developmental disabilities who are living in like some sort of a residential setting, like an adult family home, have curfews, things like that. You have more control and more freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Any other thoughts on how neurotypical connection might look a little different than neurodivergent connection? Amanda, you can go to the next slide. And yeah, having staff with you. Who wants to go on a date with like a parent or a staff person with you? So I think it's really important, again, to remember there are more than one ways, there's more than one way to connect with other people. So for a lot of neurodivergent people, they may be more introverted. And so what I see a lot is somebody goes, oh, I'd really like to have some more friends. And a staff person or a parent says, okay, great, there's this bowling group every Saturday. Let's get you to bowling. And I've had multiple clients who have said, no. Bowling is so loud. I don't want to be in a huge group of people. It's really hard. Like, I'm not, and this is me too. Like, I'm not just going to go up to a complete stranger and start up a conversation. That's a very extroverted thing to do, but a lot of introverts do not feel comfortable with that. And then there's the sensory stimulation and the noise. And so for a lot of neurodivergent people, and this is not certainly not everybody, so I'm not making a blanket statement, but groups and parties aren't for everyone. They can be overwhelming. There can be a lot of sensory overwhelm and stimulation. And so meeting one-to-one, finding one person that you have a connection with, that you have some shared interests with, can be a better way to connect. Whether that is, gaming or going out to eat or anything, doing something quietly, maybe at somebody's house, would be less anxiety provoking too. And then, yeah, Amanda said, neurotypical people know how and when to pick up on all the nuances happening during social connection. So it's less anxiety provoking, right? So it can be really hard for neurodivergent people to meet new people, especially if it's in this big group sort of setting. Yeah, and also, so Erin said, a lot of the social things are like non-integrated settings, so day programs, Special Olympics. And while it can be great to really connect with people who are similar to you because they, might understand your lived experience a little bit more, I have also had a number of clients who are pretty independent and don't really relate to somebody. It can be a pretty wide range of abilities at some of these things. And because of a lot of ableism, I'll have clients who will say, well, I'm not going to go to that because I'm high functioning, or, use the R word, or really try to think that there's this hierarchy of disability and neurodivergence. And so I don't use terms like low functioning and high functioning. I find them useless, to be honest. So somebody could be labeled as a high functioning autistic person, because they're able to just mask really well. But what masking often does is it creates a lot of anxiety and depression. So maybe they get through their whole day, but they go home and they are just so burned out and so overwhelmed and overstimulated. And now there's, significant anxiety and depression. Would I really call that high functioning? Maybe not. Or, some people are being labeled as low functioning because they don't verbally communicate, but there's so many other ways that people communicate if given the right tools and resources. And so it just makes a lot of assumptions about people. And then I think it does sort of, I've seen it create this sort of hierarchy where some people will say, well, I'm more functioning than them, or a parent in particular will say, well, I don't want them going to that group because there's people in wheelchairs. We had a parent do that once. We got somebody connected with a group that seemed like it would be really great for this person, and the parent was so mad because there was somebody with Down syndrome in that group. And so it's a lot of ableist messages can really come from that. And when it comes to dating, in person, meeting somebody in person for a date or for a friendship, really, there's so many expectations that we don't even realize neurotypical to do. The eye contact, the small talk, the etiquette, all these different kinds of things that we sort of take for granted that can be really, really difficult for somebody who's neurodivergent. And so if you could scroll to the next slide, Amanda, we'll get into that a little bit more too. And so with that meeting in person, so this is kind of where we're leading with the online. A lot of neurodivergent people feel really uncomfortable meeting somebody to face, but it's easier to meet people online. You can, type up what you want to say to somebody, think about it for a second, delete it, edit it, and send it when you feel ready to send it. In person, you could just like word vomit and your filter is off and you say something that you regret and then you get really anxious about it. And so online friendships can absolutely be real friendships. And I don't want to discourage that out of fear that somebody is going to, engage in unsafe online behavior or be taken advantage of. We need to be respecting that online friendships can absolutely be meaningful and special to a lot of people, while also teaching, how to look for some red flags and how to be safe online and how to get help if needed. So a lot of these skills, a lot of this connection involves a lot, and tons of things involve executive functioning skills. And unfortunately, this is a little small on here, so I'll read it. But executive functioning skills are cognitive processes that allow us to plan, organize, and get things done. So these can be more difficult for neurodivergent people. And so it's really important to understand how these skills can be supported better rather than focusing on sort of the rewards and punishments to force compliance. So we've got flexible thinking. When something changes, am I able to go with the flow? And if somebody's late, how am I going to handle that? If I'm running late, if plans change, how can I be flexible? Working memory is another skill. Self-monitoring, so noticing when you're hungry, noticing when you're thirsty, when you have to go to the bathroom, when your heart starts racing, noticing emotions that are coming up. That's all self-monitoring. Planning and prioritizing is another skill. Task initiation. For a lot of neurodivergent people, we'll see what we call pathological demand avoidance. And what that is avoiding any task because it feels like such a demand and it creates so much anxiety. And it could even be a task, like people just assume that, oh, they just don't want to clean their room. But this happens with tasks that people genuinely want to do. Like if I really want to read a book, I'm really interested in this one particular book, I still might not initiate that task because it takes some executive functioning skills to get through to just start the task. And so I just avoid it. If it creates any anxiety, we have a tendency to just avoid hard feelings. Organization is another skill, impulse control, thinking before you acting, and emotional control, emotional regulation, noticing what you're feeling, being able to communicate that. So all these things are really difficult to do for neurodivergent people. When you think about relationships, maintaining a good, healthy friendship or dating relationship, what exactly, or let's even just start with a date to make it simpler. Just planning a date or a get together. What executive functioning skills would you say are needed for that? Planning and prioritizing. Absolutely. That's a big one. Yeah. Thinking about like, when am I available? Find out when they're available. Planning. Yep. All of them. Yeah. I mean, working memory. You got to remember the date. You have to like put it in your calendar and then remember to be checking your calendar. Sorry, the messaging thing keeps scrolling up while I'm trying to read what everybody's writing. Organization. Yeah. So, that goes in with the kind of planning is organizing and planning. How am I going to get there? Where are we going to go? How am I going to contact them? Am I going to text them? Am I going to call them? Am I going to ask them in person? Who do I ask? Who's a good person to ask? Who do I have something in common with? Initiating the task is a huge part of that, knowing when to contact them and, dealing with the anxiety that comes up with all this whole big process, and that emotional control and emotional regulation. Impulse control, if you text somebody and they don't respond right away, do you keep texting them over and over again? If they're not responding within 5 minutes. Or the flexible thinking. What if plans change? What if you have one date in mind or one place that you want to go to, but this other person has other thoughts? Are you able to be flexible with that? So again, I think that these are just sort of skills that a lot of neurotypical people really take for granted, and you don't realize that you're doing them because it just comes naturally. But when we're working with somebody who's neurodivergent, we need to remember that these things could be a struggle. So you can teach somebody all the social skills in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to accomplish this goal of independently getting together with friends and meeting people safely. And Amanda, you can go to the next slide. One example too of this executive functioning is a lot of teenagers really hate cleaning their rooms. That's all teenagers. But I work with a neurodivergent teen whose mom is really struggling to get the teen to clean the room. And we've talked about these executive functioning skills and done training with parents to better understand why this is a struggle. It is not just this teenager is trying to be difficult or lazy. I think that's what happens a lot is autistic people and people with ADHD often get dismissed as they're just being lazy. They just don't want to do it, when that's not really the case. All right, it's these executive functioning skills that are making it really hard. And so how do we, instead of just saying, well, I'm going to take away your phone unless you clean your room, how do we instead be present, co-regulate, teach people, create visuals, create reminders, there's all different kinds of apps these days that can work to really help with these executive functioning skills, to help better plan and prioritize and organize things. So really trying to make sure that we are recognizing that there are some valid reasons why neurodivergent people are struggling with some of these areas, and that includes with connecting with people safely. So I always like to remind people, for a lot of people, dating is hard. And I think we really need to validate that when we're working with teenagers, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, making sure they know, like, this doesn't come easily to everybody, and that's okay. I was terrible at dating. It is like a miracle that somebody wanted to marry me. Honestly, I was not good at it. And so that, when we talk to people about dating, and we need to build some trust. We need to make sure that people feel comfortable coming to us. And a big part of that is people want to be heard. People want to be validated and understood. And so it's really important when somebody's coming to us with any questions about dating, relationships, sex, online safety, we are approaching it in a way that is validating, non-judgmental, non-shaming, so that they feel comfortable continuing to come to us and speak up for themselves, and know that, this is not easy, but we're going to work through it together. And Amanda, if you want to scroll to the next one. So again, this is a little bit tiny on the screen, so I'll kind of go through it a little bit. Steps to connecting. So, when we're helping neurodivergent teens and youth connect safely with people, whether that is in person or online, these are some of the steps that we need to keep in mind. So first, education. This needs to be happening throughout. It is not a one and done conversation, right? I know we hear about quote unquote the talk all the time, but it's not the talk. It is multiple talks. It is multiple conversations. And I really try to make it as natural as possible and encourage, whether it's providers or parents or other caregivers, to have it be more of a conversation and not feel like a lecture. The second education starts to feel like, oh, I'm just at school, this is just a lecture, or they're telling me this because I'm in trouble, I've done something wrong, and now, I have to sit here and listen to a lecture on consent or safety or online safety. They're going to shut down. They're not going to remember information as well. Our brains do not absorb information as well when we are feeling at all dysregulated. And so if they are picking up from you that you are uncomfortable with the conversation, you don't really want to talk about this, you're upset with them because of something they did, and now we have to have this conversation, that's what their brain is going to be focused on, is that discomfort, that anxiety, that I just want to get out of here right now, I just want this conversation to be over. And the information is not going to get retained as well. That's just how our brains work. We don't remember things as well when we are emotionally dysregulated. So anything we can do to make these conversations, again, non-judgmental and non-shaming, but natural. One thing that I encourage a lot of parents and caregivers to do is pay attention to what you and your teen or youth are watching on TV. Don't just fast forward through a sex scene. There's all different kinds of shows and movies out there that are geared towards teens and tweens that have some pretty unhealthy relationship behaviors in them. I use Twilight as an example all the time. So for those of you who haven't seen Twilight, vampire guy, I don't remember their names. I've only seen it one time. It was for an event that we put on. And so, the vampire dude has come into Bella's room, and he admits that he watches her sleep at night. He just came right into her room and apparently has been watching her sleep at night. And Bella swoons, and it's so romantic. And I asked people, when we did this event and we watched this movie and then we kind of had a conversation about it, we then talked about, okay, in real life, if somebody's telling you they're watching you sleep at night, what would you do? Right? Like that's stalking, that's breaking and entering, that's totally unhealthy and not, you would call the cops. But again, in these movies that are geared towards teens, it's seen as romantic. And that's really dangerous to have media. And I'm not trying to ruin Twilight for anybody. And I know it's entertainment and that's it. But these kinds of movies and scenes are really good opportunities to have conversations. There's a lot of shows too where a guy just grabs a woman and kisses her. That's a great opportunity to talk about consent. And again, it's seen as romantic. Or there's a lot of movies where you see a guy just like really pursuing a girl and really has a crush on her, and she says no, or she's with somebody else, but he keeps pursuing it and he doesn't let that go. And then finally she agrees and they're in love. That's incredibly unhealthy relationship behavior, right? If somebody says no, if somebody's already in a relationship, you don't keep asking. And so using those opportunities to bring up these conversations can be really positive. And then again, I don't want anybody to ruin their favorite show for them or anything like that. It doesn't have to become this huge lecture, but it's a nice way to just connect with something that they're already interested in and make it feel less lectury. And these are some topics that everybody, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, need to understand. We need to talk about consent and not just saying, it's a yes. We need to understand that it has to happen every time for every touch. It needs to be enthusiastic. What are some nonverbal cues that somebody might be sending you that they either are or are not interested in that touch? How do you handle rejection? How do you handle being told no? People need to learn about healthy and safe sex, setting boundaries, respecting other people's boundaries. Online safety is a huge one for teens, and we're going to keep getting into that more. But something that I usually do at the very start, even before education, I should have flipped the goals and values to before education. Everybody really needs to first determine what it is they want. And this is particularly true with like online dating, because online dating profiles will ask you, what are you looking for, right? Like, are you looking for a serious relationship, marriage, hookups, casual dating? What age are you looking for? Those kinds of questions. And it's good to get into that in some good detail. So what kind of partner are you looking for? And, what age range do you want it to be? If you're working with youth and they're under 18, obviously you need to talk about, the age of consent. But what qualities do you look for in a partner? What qualities do you bring to a relationship? What kind of partner do you want to be? Asking about what are some things that a partner might do that would make like, that's my deal breaker. I could never date somebody who, puts me down or hurts me physically or steals from me, things like that. And so this is really important because when somebody is then in a relationship, potentially with somebody online, and they come to you and say, oh yeah, the guy I'm dating called me a loser. We can go back to those goals and say, like, I'm really sorry that happened. How did you feel about that? What do you think about that? Is that matching up with the goals that you set for yourself? I don't force people to see it my way. Granted, sometimes people will say, well, no, he was just in a bad mood, and make excuses. I don't force people to like agree with me when something is unhealthy, but it gets the wheels turning. It gets people to start thinking about and reminding people like what they're really looking for, and keeping an eye on some of these red flags. So knowing your goals and your values when it comes to relationships and sex is really important. Again, because then you can come back to them and be like, oh, you know what? This person really isn't meeting my needs. This person I met online really is being kind of sketchy. Like I remember thinking about what are my boundaries, and this person is crossing them. We also need opportunities, and we might need to help create opportunities for people to meet safely. And turning to online dating or meeting people online might just be their only option. For some people, it is legitimately easier to meet people online. For some people, it's just, I never get to have any opportunities to meet people in person, and this is all I can do. That's why I did online dating back when I was in my 20s, is I really realized all my friends were getting married. All my friends had partners. I wasn't getting introduced to other single people. I didn't have opportunities to meet potential dating partners. So I tried online dating, right? And so I think that's also important to remember, so that we're not just shutting down. You shouldn't be on this gaming site, or you shouldn't be on, Discord or this Facebook group or whatever they're meeting, without fully understanding why somebody is using that to connect. And thinking too about what can we as a system or in our role do to help with this. So there are certainly sometimes events going on, but in rural communities, there really isn't much. It's really hard to help people with disabilities connect in those more rural areas. So how can we as professionals help with this? If we work for a residential agency, can us and a staff knows another residential client who might make a really good friend. Like these two clients might make a really good friend. Can we, fill out some release forms and help them connect one-to-one, right? Like trying to get a little bit creative. Or if somebody is really interested in comic books, but hasn't met anybody else, can we help them form a group and get the word out there and help them create something that, then they become more independent with it down the road, so that, they learn how to set these kinds of things up in the future for themselves. Sometimes it's thinking outside the box and really kind of figuring out what are their goals, and what's most important to them, and what would look like good, safe, healthy connections and mean connections. So another part of connecting is just that getting to know each other. This might require transportation or staff or family to help with the logistics. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a mom or dad should be sitting there with somebody on a date or hanging out. Like they can go sit somewhere else. But impulsiveness can often make people want to jump into relationships right away. I've got a teen client who is an adult now, but often, has these online relationships, and they will be in, like, this person will be the boyfriend or girlfriend right away. Like, barely any time goes by, and then it lasts for like 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden there's a new person. And so sometimes I see a lot of people really rush into these relationships, and I think a big part of that is that difficulty with the impulse control, as well as the loneliness, and difficulty with emotional regulation, and understanding, maybe I'm doing this because I'm feeling lonely, but maybe there are other ways to connect with people that might be a little bit safer. Some of that processing can be really difficult. And so somebody might really jump on, meeting up with somebody. And I remember when I first started doing online dating, I was responding to every message I got and going out with like every guy who asked me out. And I started to realize that's not the best process here. I realized it when I called a guy the wrong name on a date once. So that impulsiveness it's real, but I think we need to also validate, hey, I understand like how good it feels to have somebody interested in you and somebody care about you. What's that like for you? Have you felt that before? Do you get that feeling from other people? Just trying to help neurodivergent youth really think through what their goals are and what they're looking for, and what might be driving some of their impulsivity or eagerness to meet up with somebody that might not really be safe. And then dating and breaking up, I mean, people need somebody that they can trust throughout a relationship to go to if there are questions or concerns, or if they're considering breaking up with somebody. I just had a friend message me today saying he needed some relationship advice and is considering breaking up with a friend. We all, I think, as neurotypical people, just know we have some trusted friends that we can go to with these questions and concerns. Some neurodivergent people might not have that. Or they might think that they have it. I have a client who has lots of friends, but there's a lot of drama, and they don't always give great advice. So we really want to make sure that we are connecting people with some trusted people, and that could be a teacher, a family member. Sometimes siblings can be really helpful with that. It can be a therapist, but helping people identify, okay, so if something's not going well, who do you feel comfortable and safe talking to about it? And I always tell people, it doesn't have to be me. Like, if you don't want to talk to me about it, that's fine. But, sometimes I have clients who say, I'd rather talk to my sister about this. And that's completely okay, because I know that sister is a good, trustworthy person. So, let's see, I'm trying to read this part too. So creating some safe spaces for teens and young adults to come to us is really important. And again, this comes back to not judging or shaming. A lot of times when somebody is sexting, the immediate response may be, I'm going to take away the phone, or why would you do that? That's wrong. That kind of response is really going to make somebody to shut down and not want to come to you, or not want to come to anybody else. I mean, if you could go to the next slide. So let's say somebody you support in whatever way is sexting, online dating, or sending inappropriate messages. What's your gut reaction? And you can use emojis again if you want. But sometimes we get some pretty immediate feelings ourselves. Any thoughts? What would be like your gut reaction if you didn't have like emotional control or impulse control? Okay, so I see like a thinking emoji, like, I wonder what's going on there. Wonder why they did that. This person is vulnerable, at risk of abuse. Yeah, fear. Right? Like, we're all in positions where we really want to take care of people and care for people and protect people. And so a lot of times we will respond with that sense of fear. And sometimes that actually can lead us to responses that aren't always the most helpful. So I'm afraid that somebody is going to be exploited or hurt or abused. So I have to protect them. I have to shelter them. They shouldn't have internet access. I need to put a bunch of controls on their phone, right? Fear can lead us to like trying to seek out more control. Not always, but it's just something to be aware of. Shock, absolutely. I've had clients who I know have like said things in sessions, and I think they're looking for the shock factor. I once had a client pull out what was like a homemade dildo, basically, and she was looking at my face to see what my response was going to be, and I have gotten very good at just remaining very neutral, as neutral as possible, and not responding with like, oh, or huh, or why would you show me that? Sometimes that shock can make us also really intentionally send some messages of judgment or shame. So again, it's just important to reflect on, again, your values and how you might feel, because your feelings and your thoughts about somebody else's behavior is going to drive how you respond. Amanda, can you go to the next slide? So the behavioral approach is what I think we see a lot. So that is rewards and consequences. And I'm not saying that there can never be consequences, but really all a consequence is the thing that happens next. And to be able to learn from a consequence, you have to be emotionally regulated. That's really important. So if you are in the middle of an argument with your parent and over cleaning your room, and they take the phone away and you're so emotionally dysregulated, and that just makes you even angrier, maybe it gets you to clean your room right in that moment, but long term it's probably not going to be encouraging you, because you might not be making that connection that you need to make between cause and effect, to be able to slow down on in the future, particularly with impulses. Consequences, when somebody really struggles with impulses, consequences aren't really the most useful approach, because these impulses can come so quickly that they're not thinking about what might happen a week from now, or what might happen when my parent finds out about this. So consequences just aren't always the best. It also leads to that trained compliance and decreased self-reliance, decreased empowerment. So when somebody is always getting rewarded or punished for certain behaviors, they don't learn to think critically. They don't learn to assert themselves. They just learn to do as they're told. This also, gets used to other people making decisions, and that's just a normalization of unhealthy power and control dynamics in future relationships. It can be a very short-term solution. And what I find, so I have a 2.5-year-old, and what I find is when I am most tempted to implement a consequence or threaten a compliment, so I'm going to take this away if you don't start doing this, I find that I am doing that when I myself am feeling dysregulated. That's when we tend to turn to those, because it might seem like a quick fix in that moment, and I'm dysregulated and I'm just trying to get through this moment right now, but it's not a long-term solution. And this is what we see a lot with both teens and adults with developmental disabilities, that if they engage in sexting, or they watch porn, or they're messaging people online that aren't safe, or they're not well known, the phone gets taken away. What do you think happens when teens and adults have their phone or internet taken away and they no longer can connect to this person with their own phone? What might they do? Keep in mind, most people are very resourceful. Can you repeat? Yeah. So, if you're in some risky behavior online and a parent or somebody takes the phone away, how might that teen or young adult respond? What might they do to get their needs met? Sneak out to see them, steal a phone, ask for a phone from somebody else, find other means to communicate. Absolutely. And now what's happened is that parent or caregiver or staff has no idea what is going on, has no idea that this person is sneaking out or is messaging them in on the library computer or a friend's phone or things like that. This really makes them less safe. Secrets and distrust are going to create more safety issues. Because also, if somebody is maybe getting messages that they realize, that's really unsafe, but they were told you are not to be communicating with this person anymore, and they now go to a parent to ask to say like, oh, something is seeming really weird or uncomfortable or unsafe, they may not want to go to that parent to say that because they're afraid of having their phone taken away. I wasn't supposed to be talking to this person, so I'm going to get punished. I'm going to lose my phone. So I'm just going to keep this unsafe thing to myself. So it's leading people to not report potentially unsafe behavior or traumatic events because they're afraid, or I was, out late past my curfew. I didn't go at home when I was supposed to, or I was with somebody I wasn't supposed to be with. I don't want to tell my parents or my caregivers or a staff about that because I'm going to have a consequence. I'm going to lose something. So we, again, really, especially with this online safety, we need people to know they have somebody to trust and to go to. The behavioral model also really focuses on eliminating a behavior. But what's missing is understanding the why, understanding what is driving this person to act in an unsafe way. There's a lot of reasons why somebody might be doing that. Again, impulse control struggles, emotional regulation struggles, not having any other opportunities to meet people safely. I know I've had clients who keep asking out coworkers after they've been told not to do that, and looking at their schedule, they literally just go from home to work and back home and have no other opportunities to meet anybody. They also usually see that other coworkers are in fact dating, and may not understand why they can't date their coworkers too. So really, like, not just without understanding why. And again, it's not that consequences can never be used. I usually like to think of it as make sure a consequence is really related to whatever the action was. So if I had a client who stole something, we would obviously have to return that, pay that back, maybe to write an apology letter, or earn enough money to pay back whatever it was that was taken, something like that. Or if they did something, they touched somebody without consent, they need to do some research on consent, or they need to do some sort of a training. A little careful with that sometimes, because I've had clients come to me, like kind of be forced to come to me because of something unsafe that they did, like touching another student without consent. And then it becomes not wanting to talk to me because it's, I'm here because I was bad. So sometimes a little bit careful with that to make sure that people aren't just coming to like a therapist or an educator and feeling like I'm being forced to do this because I was a bad person, kind of creating that shame and judgment. But yeah, to increase safety, we want to increase trust. So next slide, please, Amanda. So what we see a lot now, when somebody is engaging in risky, dating behavior, online behavior, the immediate response is to take the phone or the internet or the computer away. And this is a short-term solution that's not thinking about what's the need that's not getting met. How does this person feel when they engage online in this way? Is it exciting for them? Is there another way to get that excitement, to get that thrill, to get that dopamine hit? Right? A lot of people with ADHD are looking for stimulation and connection, and going online and talking to new people could be them just trying to get that stimulation and get that dopamine that they need. Talking about, is there consent, like especially with sexting, having conversations about consent, and what other opportunities are available to get these needs met more safely. So instead of that behavioral approach, when it comes to risky online behavior and sexting and things like that, we want to be proactive. We want to help people get a better understanding of what might be happening to drive unsafe or risky actions. Were you feeling lonely or bored? Were you feeling excluded? Were you feeling controlled? That's something that comes up a lot with my teens and adults is I don't get a say in anything that I do. Somebody's always telling me what to do and where to go. And that really, when the more we try to control people, this is just human nature, the more they're going to push back. The more they're going to sort of rebel. And it's in an effort to feel control. We all need to feel control over our lives, meaningful control over our lives. So we want to make sure that we are having conversations about that too. That's something I ask pretty much every client I work with. We also need to be identifying gaps in addressing these needs. So if the need is that they're lonely or bored, there's so many things we can do about that. And I know sometimes that's hard because funding or transportation is needed, or it's a rural area and there's not a whole lot to do. But, again, just talking about that, helping people understand what's driving them. Do we need to get mental health services set up? If there's anxiety or depression, or if there's trauma, that's really key. That I think a lot of people assume that somebody who has experienced trauma will avoid social situations or avoid sex and dating, and that's certainly true at times. But with trauma, we see this overactive hypothalamus kind of constantly alerting to danger. We can also see the opposite, where it's just kind of not working and people aren't noticing danger. And they may be seeking out connection even after experiencing trauma. So it's really important to consider our mental health needs not getting met. And then coming back to helping people identify what their goals and values are. How are you hoping that person would respond to you online, right? If somebody sends a sexual message, what was your goal? What was the end goal there? Again, not in a shaming or judgy way, but how are you hoping they would respond? Is this something that you think a lot of other people do? Trying to understand where they learned that, if their friends are doing it and talking about it, did they learn it from media? Just trying to better understand again where that drive is coming from, not just for us, but helping them make those connections. And that takes asking some open-ended questions to reflect. It takes validating their feelings and needs. It's really hard when we're lonely and we have nothing to do. I get why you would be reaching out to this person. I really am. I really care about your safety. And so I'm wondering if we can find another way to help you connect. You can go to the next slide. I don't think that was the last slide, or did you just accidentally close out? Oh, back up. And up a little bit more there, and down a couple. Okay, so when we increase opportunities, we increase safety. When we, and so this is that proactive approach. And I know that it's an investment of time. It's an investment of money sometimes. But when we have more education and more opportunities around dating and relationships, that increases the supports to date safely. It gives people more comfort and somebody to talk to. It increases the expectations for dating. It also increases confidence, which can decrease that social isolation and loneliness and depression. So we're going to see fewer, crisis or crises, and fewer trips to the hospital, or fewer, seeking out of stimulation and connection. And so all of this is going to end up leading to increased safety. So yes, doing this, doing the education, building relationships with people that are trusted, and providing supports and providing transportation and doing that work. I know it's a lot of work, and I know it's not always easy to do. But what we're going to see is decreases in unsafe behavior, decreases in unwanted teen pregnancies and STIs, decreases in anxiety, decreases in depression, and overall for the long term. Again, this is an investment in the long term. It's going to save us time. It's going to save us the system money. Unfortunately, what I see often is our systems don't really fund things proactively, which is incredibly frustrating for me. I have tried to get funding for social transportation or leisure type things, and or more supports around that in this state, or iris or managed care, whatever it is. Don't always see the value in that, because they're really focused again on that medical model. So we really need to be strong advocates, and continue to support people in finding and connecting safely. And then if you want to go to the next slide. It's okay, Amanda. So, when we dismiss needs and values and what they're really looking for, and we forget to think about what's driving behavior, we risk seeing them sneak around to less safe situations. I've had referrals to where a staff person has called and said, "We really need your help. This young woman is going to the mall to have sex with her boyfriend." I asked, is it consensual? Yes, absolutely. And do they have a safe and appropriate place at home to engage in sexual activity? They were both adults. No, that's not allowed in their house. So of course they're going to sneak around. Of course they're going to go to play, like, just because they're not allowed to have it in the house doesn't mean they're all of a sudden going to say, "Okay, I guess I'll just never have sex." So that was my immediate recommendation is, these are adults who have rights, and we need to help them explore this in a safe and appropriate way. We also have, we talked about our values. A lot of us have grown up with a lot of messages of shame around sexuality, that it's just something we don't talk about. And certainly neurodivergent people get those messages too, maybe even more so, because people make a lot of assumptions about, whether or not they should or can have sex. So, and I know that it's an uncomfortable topic. I know it's really hard to talk about. It's particularly, even with your kids, or if it's, you're a paid caregiver, and it's not like I'm saying just encourage people to go have sex at home or anything like that, but they, the more people feel controlled, the more people feel like they don't have a say in their lives, the more they're going to rebel, the more they're going to push back, the more they're going to sneak around, the less safe they're going to be. So we need to build trusting relationships. We need to really work with people on education, and make sure that we're not making any assumptions about what somebody wants. I know I've seen reports of a kid I used to work with back when I was in college, and a social worker had kind of put together a report and said that this kid was antisocial, like used the word antisocial for this autistic kid that I was working with. And I refuted that. And I said, no, he's not. He absolutely wants friendships. He just doesn't know how to go about it in a way that his peers are going about it. Like he just doesn't have the same kind of social skills as his peers, but he absolutely wants friends. So let's not put that label of antisocial on him, because what that does is when a new staff person comes in and sees, oh, this person's antisocial, they're going to assume, well, then I don't need to bother setting up like social activities or things to do with them. And it's going to be more isolating. So when something does become unsafe, we really want them to know who they have to go to, how to report, that there's a trusted person who is not going to make them feel bad, or we call that victim blaming too. So if somebody is a victim and we say, well, you weren't supposed to be out, or why were you drinking, or you knew that person was bad news, that's victim blaming. That is going to really, again, lead to a lot of shame. It's going to impact their healing and their mental health. I have seen that as a therapist. I've seen parents and caregivers sort of take that approach and be really frustrated when something traumatic happens. And it's we need to make sure that people are getting the mental health care that they need and not being blamed when they are victimized. Amanda, you can go to the next slide. So what's next? I've got the part 2 in March, and we're going to get more into what are the signs of grooming, learning about what are some common dating sites. Of course, dating sites are only for 18 and up, but there are a ton of gaming websites out there. That's where a lot of teenagers meet up or meet people online. And so how do we kind of make sure that we understand all these sites a little bit more? What red flags to watch for online, and how to teach these to neurodivergent youth. Again, we've talked a lot already about understanding reasons people turn to the online friendships and the non-behavioral responses, but that'll all be wrapped up into the next session as well. So I want to open it up to questions now. I saw somebody typed about asking about a curriculum. Yes. So Elevatus Training has a curriculum out there exactly on these topics. It does cost money. And then I also have, so I think, yeah, my email address is here. So if we can keep that up for a second. I created on my website, or you can just go to my website and get this too. I have a parent and caregiver resource list, which is, it's pretty big. It's a lot of stuff, but it's all videos, podcasts, websites, curriculums, books, things that caregivers would really benefit from to help learn how to have these conversations. It is for free to download from my website. So if you go to my website, there's like a store button, and you can just go there and download that, and feel free to share that with parents and caregivers as well, or you can use it yourself. It's not just for parents. Any other questions or thoughts or comments?
You can pop more of that in the chat too. As you're thinking of your questions, we're going to put our end poll up here. If I can. Oh, what date is the one in March? I can put that back up again. March 20th. Same time, it'll be the last in our
Thank you, Stacy.
youth series. is here. There we go. I'm just gonna do the final poll question. If you could just take a minute and answer that final 2 questions. That would be excellent. While you're doing that, just want to remind everybody, if you logged on this afternoon through anywhere other than the registration link, which that's 100% fine. If someone shared it with you. We appreciate people sharing the information. Just make sure you get in contact with us through our email. Send us your full name and email address. That makes sure that we are able to send your certificate of attendance, give you the contact hours, and afterwards, that makes sure we're able to let you know where the post-event information will be stored. So just the video recording, the slides, and we'll be working with Ellen on a toolkit so you can dig deeper into the learning. So make sure you contact us with that if you jumped on not through the registration link. We're also going to ask that you fill out the post-event survey. It's a quick Qualtrics, takes about 5 to 7 minutes. We know everybody's busy, but it does help us, especially those first 5 questions, to give feedback to Ellen and to all of our presenters. So if you go on, you're like, oh, I never filled out the post-event survey for another presentation that you're on, take the time to do that for those events as well. We appreciate it. And it also helps us determine what other professional development you're looking for. So we appreciate that you take the time to do that. Tomorrow we have another event coming up in our youth mental health and social success series. It's our 5 is Against the Law. We have another lived experiences panel. That will be same time as this afternoon's presentation. And then on Monday of next week, we will have another presentation from our Know Your Resources series from the Opioid Response Network. And that will be from 10 to 11 Central Time. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and end the poll. If you have any questions for Ellen, please feel free to stay on and ask the question.